discuss the Communist Manifesto. This isn't a secret Russian meeting. Critically discuss the Communist Manifesto. So, yeah, definitely not like a yay, go Communist Manifesto, go communism thing. It's not a... What's the word I'm looking for? It's not like a secret underground organization. The I'm sorry was true, though, because I didn't realize how late it was, and so didn't eat. So, I have to eat, but I didn't want to be late. So, I'm going to get to the manifesto. I just need to eat a little something first. People are going to think this is some kind of watching me eat channel. So they did the donuts at one time. Alright. Let's get to it. Manifesto. I think that was it. So last time, I just read chapter 1. And it was basically a... Hello, Judge Judy Slayer. Welcome. Thanks for following. Oh, you're not even in here. That's weird. I don't know how Twitch works. Anyways, I read the first chapter, which was basically, yes, but nobody I don't know. Rachel says I'm in here. Yeah, it was basically a critique of capitalism. It didn't give any solutions. It was just like, this is what's wrong with it. But it came from still a very colonialist point of view. It made some good points, but overlooked some big things. So this is chapter 2. Proletarians and Communists. In what relation do the Communists stand to the proletarians as a whole? The Communists do not form a separate party opposed to other working class parties. They have no interests separate and apart from those of the proletariat as a whole. They do not set up any sectarian principles of their own by which to shape and mold the proletarian movement. That sounds to me like a lot of people's criticisms of communism are put to rest right there. The big, like a communist dictatorship does not follow the principles of the manifesto. The communists are distinguished from the other working class parties by this only: 1. In the national struggles of the proletarians of the different countries, they point out and bring to the front the common interests of the entire proletariat, independently of all nationality. So it's large in scale. In the various stages of development which the struggle of the working class against the bourgeoisie has to pass through, they always and everywhere represent the interests of the movement as a whole. So they're just a party that pushes for what most people want? Or what is good for most people? I think there's a difference. The communists, therefore, are on the one hand practically the most advanced and resolute section of the working class parties of every country, that section which pushes forward all others. On the other hand, theoretically, they have over the great mass of the proletariat the advantage of clearly understanding the line of march, the conditions, and the ultimate general results of the proletarian movement. Okay. So it sounds to me like it's a little. We do what's best for them, not what they want. Maybe, I don't know, maybe I'm misinterpreting that. The immediate point, but like in a good way. Maybe? Can you do that in a good way? I think the education part of this is key to that thought of doing it in a good way. Um, I think an educated, but by educated I don't mean like universal university, like the colonial definition of education, but educated in like being self-aware and it's hard to be self-determining if you're not self-aware, but being self-aware and aware of others and like educated in, I don't want to say morality because morality is subjective to the, I think, is it? Okay, I'm not questioning the nature of morality now. I'm going to keep reading. The immediate aim of the communists is the same as that of all other proletarian parties: formation of the proletariat into a class, overthrow the bourgeois supremacy, conquest of political power by the proletariat. Oh, so it is a little, it's like conquest. But it's by the proletariat. It's so like, I mean, it's so work focused, right? It does seem like another regime almost. Like another, these people are better than these people. But it's like they're better based on not wanting to subjugate others, which is better. So it's complicated. Oh, hey, Buvit. Welcome. Yeah, it's a complicated moral question. If anybody has any thoughts, and if you didn't understand what I was just saying, that makes two of us. Yeah. The theoretical conclusions of the communists are in no way based on ideas or principles that have been invented or discovered by this or that would-be universal reformer. So is that just a fancy way of saying it's new? They merely express in general terms actual relations springing from an existing class struggle, from a historical movement going on under our very eyes. The abolition of existing property relations is not at all a distinctive feature of capitalism. Is it just like super self-aware? Did it just say only like we recognize that this works in these circumstances? Huh. Maybe I'm misunderstanding again, but that's like actually really great because they're not saying that these principles always apply. All property relations in the past have continually been subject to historical change consequent upon the change in historical conditions. The French Revolution, for example, abolished feudal property in favor of the bourgeois property. So it's just recognizing its place in history. The distinguishing feature of communism is not the abolition of property generally, but the abolition of bourgeois property. Oh, but modern bourgeois private property is the final and most complete expression of the system of producing and appropriating products that is based on class antagonisms on the exploitation of the many by the few. So, yeah, it's basically saying this isn't like the need, not the need to overthrow, but I mean, the kind of almost so aggressive. I mean, the aggressiveness of it, yeah, um, is valid in this point in time. But we recognize that we wouldn't always be right? Or is it them just saying, like, hey, this is an excuse, this is why we get to do this? Phew. In a sense, the theory of communists may be summed up in the single sentence, abolition of private property. Okay, well, maybe I'm overthinking things. We communists have been reproached with the desire of abolishing the right of personally acquiring property as the fruit of a man's own labor, which property is alleged to be the groundwork of all personal freedom, activity, and independence. Okay. So it's saying acquiring land shouldn't be allowed by working. It kind of makes sense. Hard won, self acquired, self earned property. Do you mean the property of the petty artisan and of the small peasant, a form of property that preceded the bourgeois form? There is no need to abolish that. The development of industry has to a great extent already destroyed it, and is still destroying it daily. Or do you mean modern bourgeois private property? But does wage labor create any property for the laborer? Not a bit. It creates capital, i.e., the kind of property which exploits wage labor and which cannot increase except upon condition of begetting a new supply of wage labor for fresh exploitation. Yeah, okay. Property, in its present form, is based on the antagonism of capital and wage labor. Let us examine both sides of the antagonism. Okay. So it's basically saying that work and land shouldn't be connected by money, or shouldn't be separated by money. Yeah. I don't know how much is. Okay, well, we haven't got there yet. But so far, it doesn't like protect those who can't work, like, or who, yeah, the sick, the elderly, in our current society, the disabled, often. On this, work is still the basis of like value, it seems, so far. Let us examine both sides of this antagonism. To be a capitalist is to have not only a purely personal but social status in production. Capital is a collective product, and only by the united action of many members, nay, in the last resort, only by the united action of all members of society, can it be set in motion. So everyone, for money, capital, only works if everyone buys in, or I guess a big enough percentage of people to buy in. Capital is therefore not a personal, it is a social power. Interesting. When, therefore, capital is converted into common property, into the property of all members of society, personal property is not thereby transformed into social property. Okay, because money needs everyone's buy-in and land doesn't, you shouldn't be able to trade them? It doesn't make sense to be able to trade them, I think is what it's saying. When therefore is common property, it doesn't lose its class. When therefore capital is converted into common property, into property of all members of society, personal property is not thereby transformed into social property. Yeah, I just read this. Let us now take wage labor. The average price of wage labor is the minimum wage, i.e., that quantum of the means of subsistence which is absolutely requisite to keep the laborer in bare existence as a laborer. So basically, you have to pay them at least enough to keep themselves alive. I don't know why he didn't just say that. What, therefore, the wage laborer appropriates by means of his labor merely suffices to prolong and reproduce a bare existence. I think he's still saying the same thing. We by no means intend to abolish this personal appropriation of the products of labor, an appropriation that is made for the maintenance and reproduction of human life, and that leaves no surplus wherewith to command the labor of others. So no one should have enough that they can profit off other people's labor. I think all that we want to do away with is the miserable character of this appropriation, under which the laborer lives merely to increase capital and is allowed only to live in so far as the interest of the ruling class requires it. So by saying how much money we make, they get to decide how high we can rise within the current system, and therefore stop us from rising. In bourgeois society, living labor is but a means to increase accumulated labor, so money. In communist society, accumulated labor is but a means to widen, to enrich, to promote the existence of the laborer. So you work for yourself. You work for yourself, meaning no one has so much accumulated labor, money, that they can buy the labor of the other. Okay, buy the labor of the other. In bourgeois society, therefore, the past dominates the present. In communist society, the present dominates the past. In bourgeois society, capital is independent and has individuality, while the living person is dependent and has no individuality. I'm not sure I understand. Is anyone here to explain it to me? All right, I'm just going to read it again. In bourgeois society, therefore, the past dominates the present. Past dominates the present. So the work people have done carried forward to the present gets dominated by that work, because then they have they can buy more work and project it into the future via money. So it's just really complicatedly talking about money. But I think it's right. In bourgeois society, capital is independent, has individuality, while the living person is dependent and has no individuality. I don't understand that. And the abolition of this stage of things is called by the bourgeois abolition of individuality and freedom. It's true, they do tell us that they're fighting for freedom, that it's all about you being able to take care of yourself and think life being easier for you. Oh, and rightly so. The abolition of bourgeois individuality, bourgeois independence, and bourgeois freedom is undoubtedly aimed at. Okay. It's their type of freedom. By freedom is meant, under the present bourgeois conditions of production, free trade, free selling, and buying. But if selling and buying disappears, free selling and buying disappears also. This talk about free selling and buying and all other brave words of our bourgeoisie about freedom in general have a meaning, if any, only in contrast with restricted selling and buying, with the fettered trades of the Middle Ages, but have no meaning when opposed to the communistic abolition of buying and selling, of the bourgeois conditions of production, and of the bourgeoisie itself. So they're basically saying that the foundation of the system is corrupt, that it's not about prices and it's not about like people, oh, things are getting too expensive. It's not about being expensive, it's about not exploiting. So it's saying a lot about what it's not. It's not saying a lot about what it is. Except that bit about it being like for whatever the proletariat wants or something. You are horrified at our intending to do away with private property, but in your existing society, private property is already done away with for 9/10 of the population. Its existence for the few is solely due to its non-existence in the hands of those 9/10. You reproach us, therefore, with intending to do away with a form of property, the necessary conditions for whose existence is the non-existence of any property for the immense majority of society. Yeah, I mean, it's talking about the 1% in terms of property instead of money. It's talking about a system where the only way they can be rich is if people are poor. In one word, if you reproach us with intending to do away with your property, precisely so, that is just what we intend. But in doing so, getting rid of the private property of those who have all the property or capital. I feel like he's focused more on property, whereas today it's more capital. Money does more these days. From the moment when labor can no longer be converted into capital, money, or rent, from the moment when labor can no longer be converted into capital, money, or rent, into a social power capable of being monopolized, i.e., from the moment when individual property can no longer be transformed into bourgeois property, into capital, from that moment, you say, individuality vanishes. So the people who are opposed to communism are saying that when they can't steal your labor anymore, that's when individuality vanishes. Because they can't. Because those are the rules. You must therefore confess that by individual you mean no other person than the bourgeois, than the middle class owner of property. Wait, what? You mean no other person than the bourgeois. So it's only the owner of property. This person must indeed be swept out of the way and made impossible. Communism deprives no man of the power to appropriate the products of society. All that it does is to deprive him of the power to subjugate the labor of others by means of such appropriation. Yeah, it's just I don't think we think of labor as a commodity anymore. I think we think of it as just what you do to get money, because you need money. That's how the world works. People can't imagine another way. And I mean, it's hard. I'm sure this is going to get into another way. It really hasn't yet. Talk about what it's for, but not how it will get there. Communism deprives. Yeah. It has been objected that upon the abolition of private property, all work will cease, and universal laziness will overtake us. Okay, another argument against communism. According to this, bourgeois society ought to have gone to the dogs through sheer idleness. For those of its members who work acquire nothing, and those who acquire anything do not work. The whole of this objection is but another expression of the tautology, that there can no longer be any wage labor when there is no longer any capital. So it's got it backwards. The labor is dependent. We think of it as the labor being dependent on the money. The labor needs the money because the worker needs the money under the system to live. But it's really the money that needs to work the worker, because the worker creates it. All objections urged against the communistic mode of producing and appropriating material products have, in the same way, been urged against communistic modes of producing and appropriating intellectual products. Just as to the bourgeois, the disappearance of class property is a disappearance of production itself, so the disappearance of class culture is to him identical to the disappearance of all culture. That culture, the loss of which he laments, is, for the enormous majority, a mere training to act as a machine. Yeah. It's training us to act as a machine. Like, we need to make money to pay for our houses, so we sell them our labor and give them the money back. Yeah. When you own the property that the person lives in, and the property that they work, where they work, you're their boss, you set things however you want, and that's how the system does it. It's not like one individual person pulling the strings. They've built a system that just does it. But don't wrangle with us so long as to apply to our intended How much did I drink? Oh, the person is gone. It's hard to cold read something, and understand it and talk about it when it's the Communist Manifesto. If I was reading Harry Potter or something, it would be different. Maybe. I've never read Harry Potter. Let me keep reading. I don't know when that message even came. But don't wrangle with us so long as to apply to our intended abolition of bourgeois property the standard of your bourgeois notions of freedom, culture, law, etc. Your very ideas are but the outgrowth of the conditions of your bourgeois production and bourgeois property, just as your prejudice is but the will, just as your prejudice, your just not prejudice, just as your jurisprudence is but the will of your class made into a law for all, a will whose essential character and direction are determined by the economical conditions of your existence as a class. So it's a loop. It's a big loop. They benefit from it, and they control it. The selfish misconception, but they really don't. They only do because they've convinced us that they do. The selfish misconception that induces you to transform into eternal laws of nature and reason the social forms springing from your present mode of production and form of property. Historical relations that rise and disappear in the progress of production. This misconception you share with every ruling class that has preceded you. What you see clearly in the case of ancient property, what you admit in the case of feudal property, you are of course forbidden to admit in the case of your own bourgeois form of property. So it's no more just than what's come before. Abolition to the family! Even the most radical flare-up at this infamous proposal of the communists. So this is another argument against communism. Sorry, I need some water. I'm drying up here. It's a lot of talking. No one's saying anything. I don't even know if anyone's here. I'll just keep reading then. Maybe you're just here to listen. Okay, the argument that communism wants to abolish the family. On what foundation is the present family? That's okay. Rachel says she's listening, but she's very high. On what foundation is the present family, the bourgeois family, based? See, it's just asking questions, for the large part, about the foundations of society, things we don't think about. But there are some things that it seems like it doesn't think about, mainly like it's still on a colonial foundation. It's like we're busting down a level, but we have one more to go, is how it seems so far. On what foundation is the present family, the bourgeois family, based? Okay, I'll continue this time. On capital, on private gain. It is completely developed. In its completely developed form, this family exists only among the bourgeoisie. But this state of things finds its complement in the practical absence of the family among the proletarians and in public prostitution. The bourgeois family will vanish as a matter of course when its complement vanishes, and both will vanish with the vanishing of capital. So they're not saying they want to destroy the family. They're just saying it will change. Like, you're not going to just not allow people to be to live with their brother or be their brother. They're not trying to abolish that. They're just saying it will shift, it will change with the abolition of capital. Do you charge us with wanting to stop the exploitation of children by their parents? To this crime we plead guilty. Well, that's a good crime to plead guilty to. But, you will say, we destroy the most hallowed of relations when we replace home education by social. And your education, is not that also social and determined by the social conditions under which you educate? By the intervention, direct or indirect, of society by means of schools, etc.? The communists have not invented the intervention of society in education, but they do seek to alter the character of that intervention and to rescue education from the influence of the ruling class. Okay, so it's not. Education is a key part of it. And they're just saying that. You can't just hand over the reins and then call us the bad guys or something. You have to, like, handing over the reins has to include education. Yeah. The bourgeois claptrap about the family and education, about the hallowed correlation of parent and child, becomes all the more disgusting the more by the action of modern industry. All family ties among the proletarians are torn asunder, and their children transformed into simple articles of commerce and instruments of labor. Yeah, you can't really have a relationship, a real relationship with someone when you're at work all the time. Or is it because there's like daycares and like they make money off the kids? But you communists would introduce community of women, screams the whole bourgeoisie in chorus. The bourgeois sees in his wife a mere instrument of production. He hears that the instruments of production are to be exploited in common and naturally can come to no other conclusion than that of the lot of being common to all will likewise fall to the women. What? He hears that instruments of production are to be exploited in common and naturally can come to no other conclusion than that the lot of being common to all will likewise fall to the women. Oh, okay. So, I was going to say, it's talking about like he and the bourgeois sees his wife as a mere instrument of production, and it's saying that this is a bourgeois point of view. We'll see. He has not even a suspicion that the real point aimed at is to do away with the status of women as mere instruments of production. So the bourgeois is worried you're going to take away his wife. When it's really saying you don't own your wife. Okay, I'll get behind that. I thought it was coming from somewhere else. It's still talking. Yeah, I mean, it is. It's saying that feminism is part of communism. It just says it in a way that, I mean, it's saying it in the capitalist language, in a capitalist world, which is patriarchal. For the rest, nothing is more ridiculous than the virtuous indignation of our bourgeois at the community of women, which they pretend is to be openly and officially established by the communists. The communists have no need to introduce community of women. It has existed from almost from time immemorial. I'm not sure I understand community of women, but it's basically, it seems like it's saying we're not going to put all women together because women have been getting together for ever. I think. I think it's saying if you just let people do what they would naturally do, women would get together. Which I don't understand why it needs to say. That just seems like something all people would do. Maybe it's in response because it's a thing that the bourgeois raised, the whole women thing. Communism doesn't even seem like it would talk about it if the bourgeoisie hadn't raised it. So it's basically like we wouldn't need to fight the patriarchy if there was no patriarchy. I don't know if that's what it's saying or if that's just what I'm getting. Our bourgeois, not content with having the wives and daughters of their proletarians at their disposal, not to speak of common prostitutes, take the greatest pleasure from seducing each other's wives. Okay. So they're saying that like all the men, it seems like men, it's saying that under the bourgeoisie sees women, even their wives, as things that they own, things that they own, that they are entitled to. Bourgeois marriage is in reality a system of wives in common, and thus, at the most, what the communists might possibly reproach with is that the desire to introduce in substitution for a hypocritically concealed and openly legalized community of women. What? What? Bourgeois marriage is in reality a system of wives in common, and thus, at the most, what the communists might possibly be reproached with is that they desire to introduce in substitution for the hypocritically concealed and openly legalized community of women. I'm gonna be honest, I don't understand, which probably means I read it in a way that you don't understand either. For the rest, it is self-evident that the abolition of the present system of production must bring with it the abolition of the community of women springing from that system, i.e., of prostitution, both public and private. So is it saying that prostitution will go away because there won't be, women won't have to prostitute themselves anymore? It's saying that if women didn't have to make a bunch of money, they wouldn't be prostitutes, which is a little dismissive, I think, of it as a career. What if it's something someone enjoys doing? Like, there are people who like to draw as a career, or people who like, why not? It's their body, they can do what they want with it. They're not hurting anyone. But there would I think under the current system there would certainly be fewer, because everybody would have ostensibly everyone would have their needs looked after. I'm not sure how that's come in yet. So far, it's just about not being able to buy someone else's labor. There's nothing about taking care of everyone. Like, what if you don't have labor? The communists are further reproached with desiring to abolish countries and nationality. The working men have no country. We cannot take from them what they have not got. Since the proletariat must first of all acquire political supremacy, must rise to be the leading class of the nation, must constitute itself the nation, it is, so far, itself national, though not in the bourgeois sense of the word. Okay. So it's not saying, yeah, and I guess that's what I'm saying is, I think under the current capitalist system, the way sex work works, I think a lot of women are. But to say that all women are, I think dismisses the ones who would do it anyways. Like it's this because it's not shameful. It's like it's work. It's a job. But you can't just say it's work, it's a job under this system. Because with no work and no jobs, it's not no work and no jobs, but like you do what you want, not because all your needs are provided for. It hasn't got to that part yet. I guess I'm taking that for granted. Because so far it seems like almost it's not talking about working together so far. It's just saying no one can take things from you. But we'll get to that. National differences and antagonisms between peoples are daily more and more vanishing, owing to the development of the bourgeoisie, to freedom of commerce, to the world market, to uniformity in the mode of production and in the conditions of life corresponding thereto. So I guess it's varying countries are like groups of people who make money together. Is that what they're saying? I don't know. The supremacy of the proletariat will cause them to vanish still faster. Yeah. Yeah, as he sees it as service, complement to the bourgeoisie, and not body autonomy. Yeah, and I think that's a mistake he made. That it is body autonomy, and it's. I think maybe he's just assuming that no one actually wants to do it. And I think that comes from a place of judgment, of being like, oh, that's bad, that's low, no one would want to do that. But it's not bad, it's not low, and people want to do it. That's just reality. There's nothing bad about it. It's when I say it's a job, I mean it's like morally on the same level as any job. And it's only, but I mean, kind of has a point, or maybe not. Hold on. No, I thought I made a connection that I'm not sure is actually there. It's like doing mental gymnastics reading this stuff. Life corresponding thereto. The supremacy of the proletariat will cause them to vanish still faster. United action of the leading civilized countries, at least, is one of the first conditions of the emancipation of the proletariat. So it's the leading civilized countries, I take to mean the ones who are winning at capitalism, the ones who are buying the labor of the others, are the ones who have to start this. Yeah, it's very heteronormative, and men are to blame for prostitution. Yeah, you can't. The thought that it only exists because men want it is what's in his head, I guess. There's no, like, maybe women want it. Like, to do it, to create it. Like, yeah. Yeah. So, in proportion, the antagonism between classes within the nation vanishes, the hostility of one nation to another will come to an end. The charges against communism made from a religious, a philosophical, and generally from an ideological standpoint are not deserving of serious examination. Okay, Mr. Marx. I mean, I think he's talking about the stuff that we just talked about. It's just the way he put it. Does it require deep intuition to comprehend that man's ideas, views, and concepts, in one word, man's consciousness, changes with every change in the conditions of his material existence, in his social relations, and in his social life? So it's saying that the way we live has affected how we think. Like, it's part of how we live. It's hard to help it. What else does the history of ideas prove than that intellectual production changes in character in proportion as material production is changed? The ruling ideas of each age have ever been the ideas of its ruling class. So it's saying that as you're able to create more, you're able to learn more as well, like to become more educated, to understand things, but it's not, again, I think the way he uses educated isn't necessarily, or maybe it's not that it isn't, but I think that it shouldn't be um, like Western colonial education. Like, it shouldn't be education in knowing science stuff. You don't have to know that to be a good person and to create a good society. You have to know about intuition, how to interact with people. I don't think it's saying that no one has to know that. I think it's saying that everyone has to know how to connect, maybe? What else does the history of ideas prove? Oh, yeah. Yeah. When people speak of ideas that revolutionize society, they do but express the fact that within the old society, the elements of a new one have to be created, and that the dissolution of the old ideas keeps even pace with the dissolution of the conditions of existence. So as old ideas disappear, old ways of life have to disappear. Maybe. I guess it's saying that as new ideas, new ideas representing technology in our world uh, gets better, the ways we think have to get better. The technology and the way we use it has to advance together, and it hasn't. When the ancient world was in its last throes, the ancient religions were overcome by Christianity. When Christian ideas succumbed to the 18th century of rationalist ideas, feudal society fought its death battle with the then revolutionary bourgeoisie. The ideas of religious liberty and freedom of conscience merely gave expression to the sway of free competition within the domain of knowledge. Undoubtedly, how long have I been talking? Only an hour. Undoubtedly, it will be said, religious, moral, philosophical, and juridical ideas have been modified in the course of historical development. But religion, morality, philosophy, political science, and law constantly survived this change. Okay. There are, besides, eternal truths, such as freedom, justice, etc., that are common to all states of society. Oh, but communism abolishes eternal truths. It abolishes all religion and all morality instead of constituting them on a new basis. It therefore acts in contradiction with all past historical experience. What does this accusation reduce itself to? The history of all past society has consisted in the development of class antagonisms that assume different forms at different epochs. Yeah, we are a type of society grown out of the last type of society with very similar we're not as advanced as we like to think, I guess. But whatever form they may have taken, the fact is one fact is common to all past ages, viz., the exploitation of one part of society by the other. No wonder, then, that the social consciousness of past ages, despite all the multiplicity and variety it displays, moves within certain common forms or general ideas which cannot completely vanish except with the total disappearance of class antagonism. Makes sense to me. The Communist Revolution is the most radical rupture with traditional property relations. No wonder that its development involves the most radical rupture with traditional ideas. And I guess at the time, maybe it was, well, I'm not going to say maybe it was true. I mean, yeah, it was true, but it doesn't encompass all of society. It's a big problem. And it's a big problem that causes a lot of the other problems, but he doesn't seem to recognize those other problems or see them as actual problems. Either he's just assuming they'll go away because capitalism does, which I think that's what he's saying. But he is like they're part of the fight. You can't just take out one. You kind of have to fight them all at the same time. We have seen above that the first step in the revolution by the working class is to raise the proletariat to the position of ruling class, to win the battle of democracy. Okay, so he's saying we have to win by their rules before changing everything. So we can't just jump there. We have to fight the system. I guess that's what he's saying. So people who are like, oh, why don't you just, if capitalism is bad, just stop buying things. Oh, if the planet is in danger, well, why don't you just stop, go live in the forest? Yeah, that's one of them. Go live in the forest. Or if the world is overpopulated, why don't you just kill yourself? Is one that I've heard. I don't know how I got there, but I think it made sense. The proletariat will use its political supremacy to wrest, by degrees, all capital from the bourgeoisie, to centralize all instruments of production in the hands of the state, i.e., of the proletariat organized as a ruling class, to increase the total of productive forces as rapidly as possible. So we all band together within their system, and then like hulk out of it. Wonder what form that hulking out would take. Because it could be like a slow convincing and like kind of absorbing gently. But like I think it's letting the people work the way they want to work. Of course, in the beginning, this cannot be effected except by means of despotic inroads on the rights of property and on the conditions of bourgeois production, by means of measures, therefore, which appear economically insufficient and untenable, but which, in the course of the movement, outstrip themselves, necessitate further inroads upon the older social order, and are unavoidable as a means of entirely revolutionizing the mode of production. Now that sounds violent, but I don't know that he means like physically violently. I think he means talking about like banding together, gathering together, and buying them? Is that what he's suggesting? Or is he suggesting like banding together and taking them, like physically taking them? I mean, if we all banded together, oh, that's how everyone's taken care of? Everyone, to get there, we band together and buy everything, or band together and break everything of everyone who doesn't want to band? And then after that, kind of reform society. After we've won communism or capitalism, not build communism, but let everyone, or maybe build, I don't know, we'll see. These measures, of course, will be different in different countries. That's good. Nevertheless, in the most advanced countries, the following will be pretty generally applicable. 1. Abolition of property in land and application of all rents of land to public purposes. So the government can't own land. A heavy, progressive, and graduated income tax. So tax the rich, but tax a lot. Abolition of all rights of inheritance. Confiscation of the property of all emigrants and rebels. Ooh. I'm going to see how that would get messy. Centralization of credit in the hands of the state by means of a national bank with state capital and an exclusive monopoly. Okay, putting all the power in one place. Which doesn't sound great to me. But we'll see how that state is run. If that state is run in a way that is actually for the people, I mean, that's kind of how things are now. It's just that the state isn't run for the people. Centralization of the state, of means of communication and transport in the hands of the state. Okay. Transportation and communication controlled by the state, which isn't far from reality in a lot of places already. Manitoba Hydro here, Via Rail, l'SNCF in France, Alitalia in Italy, whatever it is in Germany. They're state-owned and run transportation. And here we had MTS used to be a crown corporation. Extension of factories and instruments of production owned by the state. The bringing into cultivation of wastelands and the improvement of the soil generally in accordance with the common plan. Now I can see how that could be taken, is colonialist, or could be taken as such, because it's taking your own. You can't take other people's. So under communism, colonialism never would have happened? Is that what it's saying? Or is that what I'm taking from it? Equal liability of all to labor. Establishment of industrial armies, especially for agriculture. Well, that doesn't sound good. Sounds kind of dystopian to me. I guess it does. It depends on what you mean by industrial. Like efficiently run and economically run by the state. I don't know. Armies sounds authoritarian. A combination of agriculture with manufacturing industries. Gradual abolition of the distinction between town and country by a more equal distribution of the population over the country. They want to spread people out? I guess in Europe that makes sense. So it seeming Eurocentric. Because if you spread people out more equally here, no one would ever see anyone and we don't die. Combination of agriculture with manufacturing industries. Gradual abolition of the distinction between town and... I read this already. Yeah. Free education for all children in public schools. Abolition of children's factory labor in its present form. Combination of education with industrial production, etc., etc. Free education for all children in public... it all seems really labor and work heavy. Combination of education with industrial production. Yeah. I don't know. When, in the course of development, class distinctions have disappeared and all production has been concentrated in the hands of a vast association of the whole nation, the public power will lose its political character. Political power, properly so called, is merely the organized power of one class for oppressing another. If the proletariat, during its contest with the bourgeoisie, is compelled, by the force of circumstances, to organize itself as a class, if, by means of a revolution, it makes itself the ruling class, and, as such, sweeps away by force the old conditions of production, then it will, along with these conditions, have swept away the conditions for the existence of class antagonisms and of classes generally, and will thereby have abolished its own supremacy as a class. So communism has to seize power within the class it's in, and then it can abolish classes, therefore not being the ruling class. So communism will never be the ruling class. So I feel like it's still missing something, some connection. And maybe that's what the next chapter is. It feels like it's missing there's a step missing. Who runs all this industrial everything if no one's ruling? Like how do you concentrate things somewhere? There needs to be some kind of communication. If it's too concentrated with the world the size it is, there needs to be some kind of communication. But communication owned by these people up here. Ooh, ooh, ooh. In place of the old bourgeois society, with its classes and class antagonisms, we shall have an association in which the free development of each is the condition for the free development of all. Well, I hope next chapter it's going to explain how that works. Yeah. Thanks for tuning in. How many people are here? 3 people, 2 who have commented, and 1 who has not. Yeah, thanks for listening. I hope it's hard to understand. I was just trying to make sense of it out loud is what I was doing. Yeah. No, I wasn't trying to explain anything. That was my inner monologue outside. Yeah, well, we'll see you later for chapter 3. I don't know when. I will give a little bit of notice every time. Very on my social media. But thanks for listening. See you next time, comrade.